It has been filled with uncertainty. It's been filled with chaos and doom and gloom. We look at the world around us, what's happening in Ukraine, what has happened some months ago in Afghanistan, and different corners of the globe with natural disasters, and it's just chaos after chaos, and it seems like things are just out of control. There's nothing or no one that can control the things that are happening that are around us. We see the things as government overreach in different parts of the world. We see people protesting on a regular basis, wars, natural disasters, and we tend to ask ourselves, who is in control? Who is controlling all that is happening around us? Who has been in control? And this is the question that I want you to actually ask yourselves. Who has actually been in control, not just since 2 years ago, not just since what is occurring in Ukraine or what transpired in Afghanistan and what's going on in the world that we live in, but who has been in control since before the dawn of time? And that is the question that you should ask yourselves and make it a rhetorical one. When we come to not only acknowledge, but know and believe with absolute certainty who is in control, who is the sovereign one over all that is happening, then and only then will we find peace, will we find comfort, will we find assurance amid chaos and uncertainty. Beautiful psalm that we have before, Psalm 90. And you read it and you might get the impression that the psalmist is sad and he's just venting his frustration, and he seems to be in distress. But I want to point out to you that it is on the contrary. It's not about sadness or doom or gloom or even distress. He's not venting frustration or anger. But the psalmist is depicting complete trust and submission and faith in the God whom he serves. The psalm reports, of course, the human life with all its troubles. The human life as fleeting, the human life as sinful. But the focal point of the psalm is the eternality of God, the sovereignty of God, God who judges. But yet, we can turn to him. We can run to him for refuge. We can run to him as our source of hope and strength, despite trials, despite chaos, despite uncertainties. In all of life's trials, mankind can still, believers can still and should still find confidence in the God who they serve. I want you to take a look with me at Psalm 19. I was read earlier for us by Elder last week. And I'll just read a few verses to set the tone as we go into God's Word. The psalmist writes, the prayer of Moses, it's entitled, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. A powerful exclamation point to begin the psalm. You have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Full stop. You are God. You do not change. You are the sovereign one. You were God before the world began. You are still God now, even amid the chaos and the uncertainty, and you will forever be God. You return man to the dust and say, return, O children of man. For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it's past, or as a watch in the night. God, may you speak to our hearts through your word. Convict us, Lord, and convince us. And may we find solace, strength, and comfort in the God you are to us, and the God you have proven yourself to be. In Christ's name. Amen. I want us to look at God's sovereignty and how that relates to Him in His being, us as human beings, and to us as human beings. How does His sovereignty affect and should affect us as believers, as mankind? God is sovereign, and that is something that has been explained in the first two verses before us. And God is eternal. Moses tries and emphasizes for us. Moses says, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Everything in between, He still remains God. And what is Moses saying when he's trying to point this out to us? It means God does not change. God will not change. God has never changed. And for us, this means that God, the God whom we serve, the God whom we gather here to worship today, is 100% dependable. He's 100% trustworthy. He's 100% worthy of your trust and my trust. But we not only see the eternality of God in His sovereignty, but we see that God is the supreme Lord. He's the supreme one, and that is where we get the word sovereignty from. He is the one who is in control. He's in supreme rule and authority and majesty. He's supreme over His creation. And that includes you and I. And as a result of this supreme rule in your life, this ought to give you assurance amid the uncertainties of life. And I'll give a few examples. Oh no, this pandemic seems it's never ending, and we've been going through it for 2 years. And you're like, God is still in control. God still reigns supreme. Oh no, natural disaster, there's flood and earthquakes and tsunamis. Folks, God still reigns supreme. My life is in turmoil from every angle, and I don't know where to turn. And it seems like all hope is lost. He still reigns supreme. He still reigns supreme. My faith has been shattered over this past 2 years, and it has transformed into utter fear and utter terror. God still reigns supreme over your lives. He is the supreme Lord. And that is something that I believe many believers have totally and completely forgotten as the years went on and as time goes on, that God is still in control. Not you, not me, but He is. He's the eternal one. He's the preeminent one. He's the preeminent one. He's the supreme one. He's the one that takes preeminence in our lives, or should take preeminence in our lives. He's preeminent in his might, in his strength. The rulers of this world, whether democracy or dictatorship alike, they're puffed up, ready to wield their powers at will as they see fit, ready to show who is the real boss, ready to show who is really the mighty one. But God proves himself more powerful than these leaders of the world, and his might will undo the ploys of his enemies. He's the preeminent one. He's the supreme one. He's the eternal one. But another thing that we find about God in these two verses is that he is the one true, unique God. There's no other God like him. There will be no other gods like him. No one or nothing compares to the God whom we serve. And he is the source of all things. He is the covenant-keeping God. We've learned about that. He is the ever-present, ever-living God. So what does this mean for us? What does it mean for me that God is sovereign, that God is preeminent, that God is eternal, that God is supreme? It means then, folks, he is involved with the affairs of men. He doesn't leave things to just happen by chance. He's involved with the affairs. Glorious hope awaiting you in heaven. And even if this world crumbles beneath your feet right this minute, he's still sovereign. He's still your God. The first two verses should be reason enough for mankind to submit to God. Should be reason enough for us as believers to submit ourselves to him. But if that's not enough, verses 3 to 11 ought to be compelling enough for us. And in these verses we find a contrast between the eternality of God, the sovereignty of God, the preeminence of God, versus the temporality of mere mortals as ourselves. How temporal we are as human beings. Now what the contrast is showing us is that God is sovereign, we're not. You might want to think that you are, but newsflash, we're not. We're not sovereign, he is. The psalmist tells us in verse 3 that we're nothing, we're like dust. We're fleeting, that's what it means. We're ever changing. We grow, we age, we get older, we get gray hairs, and we get wrinkles, and we get more aches and pains very easily. We are temporal, we're like grass, the psalmist says. And this speaks of an analogy where in Canaan it would get so parched that, and we see it here in some of our summers, where 1 minute the grass is green and luscious and bright and full of life, and the next minute you walk in, it's just crunching on you and it's so brown, full of dust, completely destroyed by the heat. That's our lives compared in comparison with the eternality of God. Our temporality is expressed in us aging, as I mentioned. And the psalmist says, God is gracious to us, and he can give us 70 years, 70, or even 80, or even 100 years. And the psalmist can prove that even if you live to be 100, this is like but a day in God's sight. This is like a day for our God who is eternal. Mankind is subjected to the eternal God and ought to be subjected to the eternal God, not the other way around. He alone has power over his creation. Life and death are in his hands. And as Paul reminds the Athenians, we live and move and have our beings because of God. See, Moses was expressing in verses 3 to 11 his unwavering faith, and I love this, his unwavering faith in the God whom he served, despite chastening of sin. For we are brought to an end by your anger, verse 7, by your wrath we are dismayed. You have set our iniquities before you, and our secret sin in the light of your presence. The psalmist is saying, look, as David said in Psalm 32, your hand is heavy on us because of the sin, but I will still praise you. I will still magnify you. I will still have unwavering faith in you. And this kind of chastening should lead us to fear God even more. And I would argue that's both fear, a reverential fear and an actual fear. A real fear like we saw in Acts chapter 5. And this fear will prove that we are aware of God's anger, that we are aware of his righteous indignation, and that we are committed to submit ourselves to him. So let me ask you another question. How long, and this is rhetorical, so I know especially some of the ladies don't like to diverse this information, so it's a rhetorical question, so don't worry. How long have you been on earth? How long have you been in existence? How long has this earth been in existence? Now you will hear, whichever side of the spectrum, I won't get into that, you will hear millions and billions. But how long has this earth been in existence? Many have come, many have gone. This earth is continually changing. We, as I mentioned, are continually changing. But guess who remains constant? The sovereign God. He doesn't change. He's unwavering. We submit ourselves to authorities. We submit ourselves to rulers. We submit ourselves to our spouses. We submit ourselves to parents, all of whom have variableness. They change, they waver, they're unstable. So I ask, why not submit ourselves to an unchanging, eternal, sovereign God? Why not submit to him? Submit your ways to him. Submit your will to his will. Submit your spiritual walk to him. Submit your troubles to him. Let him rule and reign in your life supreme. For the unsaved friends who might be listening in, I encourage you, submit your lives to Christ. Surrender your lives to Jesus Christ. And you do this by accepting him as Lord, making him Lord of your lives. Only then you will get to experience the bounty of the sovereignty of God and be basking in the presence of God and his sovereignty. Letting him be the preeminent one in your lives. This is both saved and unsaved. Let him take precedence, not self, not man, but God. God's sovereignty should compel us, should lead mankind to submit to him. It is expressed, his sovereignty is expressed in his person. That is who he is. He's the supreme ruler. He's the preeminent one. He's the only God. He's the eternal one. But it also demands us to submit ourselves to him, to the supreme, eminent one. But God's sovereignty should also lead us to plead to him. Verses 12 to 17. And I'll just read verse 12. After Moses concluded the brevity of life for man, he made a profound statement. So teach us how to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom, or apply our hearts to wisdom, the King James Version says. The eternality of God and the temporality of man ought to lead us to cry out to God for wisdom. This wisdom ought to be asked for on a daily basis, for daily living and for godly living. A wisdom that comes from God and God alone. Wisdom that begins with the fear of God. And a wisdom that ought to be applied to every aspect of life. Teach us of how to number our days. And here's the good part about it. He hears our cry. When we cry out and ask God for wisdom, we are promised, if any man lacks this, just ask for God. Ask it of God, and he will give it to you freely. He hears our cry for mercy. We might think he doesn't because things seem to be never-ending. The chaos and the doom and gloom and uncertainty. But he hears our cries. And he brings satisfaction to us. He brings satisfaction by his unchanging love. Verse 13, oh, return, O Lord. How long? Have pity. Be merciful, the psalmist is saying. Have mercy on me. Have mercy on us. Have pity on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love. See, Moses is saying, I don't even need material things for me to feel satisfactory in life. All I need in the mornings is your steadfast love to satisfy me. That we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Resting in God's sovereignty, folks, ought to make us glad. Why can some believers, I don't know if you've ever wondered about this or asked yourself this, but why can some believers go through this past 2 years as it were water on a duck's stained glass, masquerade smile, but genuine smile when their world is in chaos? Their lives are turned upside down, as it were, but yet they walk around as the most joyous person or people on the planet. Why can they do that? Why can they have expressed, or this expression of unfathomable peace amid financial hardship, amid physical and mental health issues, amid spiritual turmoil, amid everything that is happening around us? You know why? They put their trust in the God who controls the finances. in the God who controls the biology of man, in the God who controls these leaders who are puffing up themselves. They put their trust in the sovereign God. Why? Because they know He's in control. And me worrying about these things are going to do absolutely nothing to change the situation. But me praying to this sovereign, supreme God will transform everything. That's why, folks, because they trust their God. They know, like Moses, He is from everlasting to everlasting. They know, like Moses, that He is their dwelling place in every single generation, not only for them, but for their children and their children's children. Folks, that is reassurance right there. And that is the same God we serve. Please don't fail to remember that. He has displayed His supreme rule to us in the works of His hands, by working in us and by working through us, and has bestowed kindness on His people. So how do we face the uncertainties of life? We trust in the supreme ruler. We put our confidence in the sovereign God, in who He is, because He is the eternal one. He is the preeminent one. And we submit ourselves, our lives to Him, because no matter what comes our way, He is in complete and total control. And again, I plead to my unsaved friends, and even if you're struggling in your spiritual walk with God, surrender your lives over to Him. Submit yourselves to God. Humble yourselves before Him, and He will exalt you. He will lift you up. God is sovereign. That is what Moses wants to remind us of in this passage. He's in control, folks. Yes, things might seem to be spiraling out of control, but God is still sitting on control. You have heard me say this many times, but I continue to say, I guarantee you 100% with absolute certainty, when COVID hit, God didn't scratch His head and say, man, I didn't see that coming. What are we going to do? He's not scurrying around up in heaven trying to gather people together and form a committee to say, okay, we need to sit down and plan and strategize. When things happen in Afghanistan or what's going on in Ukraine, He didn't go into a crazy loop thinking, how can I be so blind? Folks, He's still sitting on that throne. And I can see Him just like when Isaiah saw Him in Isaiah 6. He's still lofty, He's still high and lifted up, and the angels are still crying, holy, holy, holy. Why? Because He's in control. He's unfazed by the things that are happening because He controls them. So how about we let Him be the supreme ruler? Cast our cares to Him. Stop being worried and concerned about the things that this life has to throw at us. As Jesus Christ says, stop worrying about tomorrow. Tomorrow is not even here yet. Furthermore, you're not promised to see tomorrow. Worry about today. And don't even worry about today. Cast today to Him. His cares for you. God, may we never lose sight of the fact that You are the sovereign God, You are the supreme ruler, which compels us as believers and mankind everywhere to submit ourselves to You and to cry out to plead to You so that we can experience this blessed assurance of you being our dwelling place and experience that peace of God in our lives amid what's going on in the world around us. God, we have lost sight of who you are in your being, how you have provided for us and cared for us over the many years that you have graciously granted to us on this planet. But may we come back to that realization that we are here only by your grace. And may that carry us through and spiral us through over however many years or even days or weeks or months that you have planned for us. For Christ's sake. I invite Elder Moyle and Elder Baker to come up as we go to celebrate the Lord's table. Again, a reminder of His sovereignty over all things. And the apostles and the early church captured this extremely well in Psalm chapter, in Acts chapter 4, rather, when they were praying after the release of Peter and John. And quoting scripture, they said, "Why did the Gentiles rage and the peoples plot vain things?" Or plot in vain. They're doing all of this. Russia, Putin, other world leaders, they plot, but it's vain because God is sovereign. The kings of the earth set themselves up and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed.